All right. Let me begin here with just a little bit of education, and I promise this is the only slide that has a lot of text with it, so I'll go briefly. After this, it should get a little bit more exciting here. But hydrography is the branch of science that deals with the measurement of physical features of water bodies. These are done to predict change over time with consideration of navigational safety, economic development, security, research, and environmental protection. The collection of hydrographic measurements at significant water bodies across the United States was originally proposed by our second director of the United States Geological Survey, wouldn't you know, our good friend John Wesley Powell. At Lees Ferry, a hydrographic measurement station was originally established in 1921, and in fact, this last October 1st, that hydrographic station measurement location reached its 100th anniversary. The main purpose or focus of our paper today is with regard to the work that our grandfather, Dean Tidball, did while working as a hydrographer with the U.S. Geological Survey and while he was stationed at Lees Ferry. In this view, the circled area to the lower center part of the picture is the location where the hydrographer's residence and gauging station was located.
Yeah. Our grandmother described Lees Ferry as a wonderful world of color and stone in her letters to her family back home, and as it being in a deep canyon about 7 miles from Marble Canyon Lodge with Paria Creek on one side of us and the Colorado River on the other. The Navajo Reservation was just across the river, and Navajos and Hopis also would come to the banks to fish and to collect driftwood.
So just a little bit of history on who our grandparents were. Dean Tidball, born in 1902 in the town of Whitehall, Montana. No connection to the Whitehall boats that Brad has presented to us here previously. He worked and owned a creamery, collecting and distributing milk products throughout the local community area. Our grandmother, Edna Tidball, was born in Minot, North Dakota, but moved to Whitehall, Montana, and worked as a school teacher. The couple were married in 1929. They had 3 daughters, their first being Dawn, born in 1931. In 1936, twin girls were born, Gay and our mother, Jo. While Whitehall, Montana was a beautiful location located out the eastern foothills of the Rocky Mountains, being in that area of the country, it was subject to some very harsh winters. In fact, our grandmother suffered a minor case of frostbite one particular year. Seeking to, after a number of years of consideration, seeking a warmer climate, they ended up deciding in 1950 to make the move and leave the harsh winters of Montana behind them and go down to the harsh summers of Arizona. They initially were able to seek or find employment through Lorenzo Hubble and his network of trading posts along the Arizona Strip area. They worked for a time at Marble Canyon Trading Post, Pinon, Aribe, which is located by the Hopi Indian Reservation, and ultimately at the flagship trading post, Hubble, in Ganado, Arizona. In 1952, Dean was able to achieve obtain permanent employment with the U.S. Geological Survey as a hydrographer, or as they sometimes refer to themselves, a river gauger. And his first assignment, right in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, at the confluence of Bright Angel Creek and the Colorado River. Now, the area that we've circled right there is the location where the hydrographer's residence and laboratory was located at. Hydrographic measurements were traditionally made by cable car extending over the top of the river. Not an unusual feature in that area by the 1950s, as a cable car had been there before for access across the river by the Rust Camp, which predates Phantom Ranch and Bright Angel Campground, and before the Black Bridge was constructed in 1928. From the cable car, you were able to send down sampling equipment and measure the depth of the river, the velocity of the river, and also the amount of sediment load that the water might carry. One of the ways that was done, and this is kind of explained through these close pictures here by previous hydrographer Charles Cox, who was there prior to our grandfather, was a sampling equipment that was heavily weighted. These samplers were they called fish simply because of the way they looked. They ranged in weight between 50 and 150 pounds. They had to be heavy in order to resist the velocity of the river and stay stable when they were down in the water. But a sampling bottle, which looked very much like a milk bottle, was inserted into that fish sampler, dropped in with a valve. They could open it up, collect water, then pull it back out. Then that sample of water was taken back to the laboratory and analyzed for how much concentration of sediment it contained in the water. And let me back, if you read the comment that he had on there, Dean did mention that he was, the sampler bottles looked very much like milk bottles, and he said it was kind of funny that he spent 20 years working at a creamery in Whitehall, Montana, dealing with milk bottles, and then he goes to the Grand Canyon, never sees a cow, but still works with milk bottles. So life is funny. Sampling wasn't all done by the cable car over the river, Bright Angel Creek, the smaller water bodies. It was necessary to go down into the water, wade in the water, and collect samples that way. The laboratory there, which was out on the Bright Angel floodplain delta, is a picture on the right. That is the location where they used to make mud pies, as our grandmother and our mother has told us, and we will touch on that just a little bit further here into the presentation. But view of the family there in front of the hydrographer's laboratory. It's notable that our mother and our two aunts did not live down there during the school period here. They were in boarding school up in Flagstaff, but would come down during the holidays and the summer. And of course, with the hot summer weather down there, the Phantom Ranch Pool was a very popular location for them to spend their time. In 1954, Dean was reassigned, and at that point in time, to Lees Ferry.
Yeah. As Edna wrote in early 1954, that she would be thrilled spitless if they could get a transfer to Marble Canyon. In March of 54, Dean was notified he got the permanent assignment at Lees Ferry. Edna wrote, "How lucky can we get? We can drive into and out of it, and we won't even have to hike or take mules."
An aerial view of Lees Ferry here, courtesy of our father, who's an Air Force pilot here at the time. So, but luck can be relative. And once they got off of Highway 89 trying to drive to Lees Ferry, and back in those days, the road was not paved. You can see the view there of the dirt road off to the right and Cathedral Rock in the distance. Other features out there really haven't changed too much. The balanced rock is still there. That little boy right there underneath it looks vaguely familiar to me, but but nonetheless a beautiful place. But the road that they had did not actually cross the Paria. Well, it crossed the Paria, but there was no bridge. There was a low water crossing, a ford, and it was subject to being flooded out quite frequently. So quite often, after a short time of being there, they learned it might be best to keep the car parked on the west bank of the Paria and hike the rest of the way in. Another view of the USGS facilities here, buildings next to the river here, just looking south from the upper banks there on the north. The remains of the Charles Spencer steamboat here as it looked back in the 1950s, at that time still above the waterline a little bit, certainly not that way any longer. And the remains of the old fort, Lees Fort here on the right. We'll note too that when our grandparents moved out there, very quickly they stopped calling it Lees Ferry. To them, it was called Fairyland. That was their most common phrase for the place that they lived. Sometimes she would also list on her letters that it was called Fort Tidball, but Fairyland was a more common name. For housing in the area, there were two different houses that they had to live in. There was a small house, the view right here of that one, and there was the big house. And they, during the time that they were there through 1961, they lived in both houses. I'm not quite sure why they moved around, but our grandmother noted that she really preferred the small house. The big one was too hard to keep clean. She called it a skating rink. And despite the size, they didn't really have all the conveniences of modern living. There was no electrical power. They had to use a coal light plant, which was located about 100 yards up the hill. Dean had to go out and hand crank it. It was gasoline powered to provide electricity. They only ran the electricity when he had to get on the radio for communication and when they needed lighting in the evening. And I will note there was no telephone communication either, closest phones being about 45 miles away, either down at the Gap or at Jacob Lake.
Yeah, drinking water came from a spring about a half-mile upriver. Edna wrote of an interesting event with the spring, that when the river was low, the spring would overflow, and even the washes that were usually dry had water in them.
Another characteristic of the area when they first moved there was the abundance of mining claims throughout the entire Lees Ferry Valley area. Primarily mining companies were in search of uranium, which was in a high demand at that time. Also looking for cinnabar, from which mercury could be extracted from.
Edna writes in August of 54, we have about 100 prospectors around, on foot and in planes, searching for uranium. Lots of roads going everywhere, into the hills and on top of the mesas.
But beyond that, work at the ferry and taking hydrographic measurements was very similar to what it had been at Bright Angel. There is the recording tower on the left there, just underneath Lee's backbone in that view right there. The recording tower included the floats that were used to monitor the elevation of the river. Cable cars were predominantly used here for most of the big sampling work, and they went through a good number of different types of cable cars. The initial ones being hand operated and needing to be cranked to either platform on either side once you came down to the low point and had to get yourself back up to the other side to get either on or off the car. Eventually, they had powered cable cars. The one on the right is gasoline powered, and that's our grandfather and our grandmother in that one. Later on, they even had an enclosed cable car, mostly enclosed, with a canopy over the top of it as well. Also gasoline driven, but hydraulic power here for some of the equipment. Sampling was primarily on the Colorado, but Dean's job did expand, and every month he had to make a trip into Flagstaff, where the USGS field office was located, and drop off his reports. During those trips, he was required to stop off at the Little Colorado Gauging Station, which was located at that time to the west of Highway 89, and then also at Moenkopi Wash near Tuba City. Measurements were taken there, and I'm pretty sure the Perco and several other tributaries in the area were also on his list of stops that he typically had to make. Just a few more views of the cable cars and the gauging towers here that were in the area here. Lees Ferry car on the left there, kind of hard to see. You can almost see the shadow of the car down here a little better than you can see the car up here. On the right is the recording tower at Paria Creek. Pretty sure that's our mom right there on the right at the base of the tower that's circled. Standing in the mud, I guess anything to stay cool out there in the Arizona heat. The one in the center we're pretty sure is Moenkopi. Not all of the work was as glamorous as just taking samples from the cars. Also, there was a lot of work to do maintenance on the recording towers and even basic measurements with measuring equipment, including just basic thermometers. The picture on the right is Dean taking a measurement of the temperature of the Colorado. This is the thermometer he's holding in his hand right there. We still have it in our family.
Measuring was also done by boat to access equipment on the river. Here is Dean with his dog Buddy. Also of interest, Dean was so attuned to the river, he could almost always tell the exact time when high water peaked just by listening to the river.
We had mentioned mud pies being made at the laboratory back at Bright Angel. This is kind of an example of what they were dealing with. Those milk bottles that we showed earlier would come out of the sampler looking something like this. You had muddy water, silt, sand in the bottom of that. So this material was taken into the laboratory and poured into a pan where it was measured for its total weight. Then heat was applied, and all the water was evaporated out of the pan until nothing was left but the sediments and dirt below. And that was then remeasured, and from that you could do a calculation on what the concentration of sediment load in the river was at the time that you sampled it. So the resulting product of the pan after the water was cooked out looked very much like a mud pie. And that is the common expression that they use when they were referring to the lab work, making mud pies just like children would do. Lees Ferry, of course, was a busy place. A lot of activity going on there, river runners coming in, coming out. Whoa, hang on. Dean and Edna got to know a lot of the people that frequented that area. Some of the names of those that they were well acquainted with and friends with were Art Green, Georgie White, Harry Ellison, Doc Marston, P.T. Riley, the Sanderson brothers, the Hatch brothers, some guy named Rick Mortensen, not really sure who that was, but also included even Lowell Thomas while he was making his movie in Cinerama, The Seven Wonders of the World. Following up on Lori's presentation last night, they also were able to snap a few pictures of the boats that the Disney crew brought in for the making of the movie 10 Who Dared. The Emma Dean is up there on the left there, and you can see the chair lashed to the surface or top deck of the boat right there. Interesting, there's a steering wheel right there too. I don't remember seeing the steering wheel in the movie, but it's, as Lori said, it's all smoke and mirrors. So,
Yeah. In April of 55, Edna writes, we had 16 guests here one time, when usually it's just me, Dean, and the two tomcats. She writes, Fairyland sometimes can compete with Grand Central Station. I've served over, and later in July, she wrote, I've served over 300 guest meals since June the 1st.
Very busy place here. Another view in this picture on the left, just want to note that picture of both of our grandfathers, Dean on the left and Lees Schellbach on the right. The big house also had other amenities, including a fireplace, which during the winters it got cold enough where a fire was actually needed. Case in point, it got cold enough that ice floes were not necessarily uncommon on the Colorado River in those days. This one from 1957.
Yeah, the river is, of course, also prone to flooding, as we saw in C.C. Mortensen's presentation. Edna wrote of that all-time high flood in 1957, when on June 12th, the river peaked at 126,700 CFS. Normal flow is 3,500 to 5,000 CFS. But yet, not to be outdone, the Paria Creek in the fall of 1958 had a massive flood that almost swept our grandparents away in their car while trying to cross her at dusk. Dean instinctively knew to put that car in reverse, and just in time. The Paria crested at 19,000 CFS. Normal is only 20 CFS.
While Dean was fairly occupied day to day with sampling activities and measurements and reports here, Edna did have the opportunity to get out a little bit and explore the wonders of the Colorado. She did take a couple of river trips down the Colorado from Height down to Lees. These are pictures that she provided from the Height to Lees trip that she made. Stop off at Rainbow Bridge. We have to admire her. She was also quite a provider for the family, even harvesting some deer up on the Kaibab Plateau. So I think the takeaway on that is don't mess with Edna. The other big activity, of course, that was going on in those days was the construction of Glen Canyon Dam. They kept a close eye on that. At one point, I think the river actually ran dry in front of Lees Ferry while one of the diversion tunnels was temporarily closed while the construction was still going on. And in reviewing some of the other, another picture of the dam there, reviewing some of the other photos that they provided us in their photo albums here, we had a lot of good aerial views taken in the mid-1950s of the same area of the Lees Ferry, and we had last visit in 2020. And so a couple of views of these for comparison. Another one taken from the very top of the Spencer Trail. You can see things don't look all that different with the general layout of the river and the landscape, although much fewer buildings down in the Lees Ferry area than there was back in the 1950s. Final view looking back towards the town of Page here and the cliffs there. Generally, it looks very much the same, but in reality, we know geographically things are, or in geologic time, things are changing constantly. So, Dean and Edna were stationed at Lees Ferry through 1961. After that, he was transferred to the field office in Flagstaff and stayed there through 1968, and then out to Boulder City, where he worked for a time in the operations of the Hoover Dam. Their final place of retirement was just up the road, Orderville, Utah.
A lot of mud pies were made over the years, and Edna would write home, "Oh, how I wish these were apple or cherry instead of just plain old mud." Courtesy of the Kanab Creek Bakery, we are happy to share replica mud pies for you to take, to weigh, to study the sediment, and eat them. They're edible. They will be on the back table. Enjoy.